In the mythos of the American Wild West, few names echo with as much legendary weight as Wyatt Earp. To most, he's the fearless lawman of Tombstone, the gunslinging marshal whose deeds inspired 1,000 ballads and Hollywood scenes. But strip away the myth, and a far more complex figure emerges. A man marked by heartbreak, loss, restless searching, and the scars of choices made in the name of survival. His life was not just about justice and gunfire. It was a story of love, despair, flight, and an unending quest to find where he truly belonged. From the very beginning, Wyatt knew no peace. Shortly after his birth, his father, dreaming of fertile lands and a better life, uprooted the family and led them across the continent to California. But those dreams collided with the storm of the American Civil War. 3 of Wyatt's brothers enlisted, while Wyatt, still just a boy with fire in his chest and a thirst for heroism, tried again and again to follow them. He was only 13, but he kept running away, hoping to join the army, only to be dragged home each time by his determined father. Had he been just a few years older, the story might have ended there. Another young soldier lost in the fields of battle, his name fading into silence. But fate had other plans. It spared him only to throw him into a different kind of war. At the age of 21, in the town of Lamar, Missouri, Wyatt met a woman who would change his life, Urilla Sutherland. She was young, kind-hearted, full of light. Their romance was swift and deep. They married, bought land, built a home, and soon she was expecting a child. For a fleeting moment, life offered Wyatt warmth, peace, and the quiet dream of a future. But that dream was already crumbling. Typhoid, merciless and swift. Within days, Urilla was gone. With her died not only the woman he loved, but the fragile hope of a different life. One where he might have simply been a husband and father. Something inside him broke. His heart hardened. His eyes turned cold. The boy who once chased glory vanished, replaced by a man who solved problems with his fists, or with a gun. He drifted, fell in with dangerous company, stepped across the law more than once. At one point, he was even arrested for horse theft, a grave crime at the time. He was thrown in jail, but Wyatt Earp had no intention of waiting for a sentence. He escaped. Next stop, Peoria, Illinois. But the welcome there was anything but warm. Locals called him the Peoria loafer, and not without reason. He was brash, unruly, a walking scandal. No one could have imagined that this disgraced figure would one day stand for law and order on the frontier. Eventually, he left again. When he learned that his brother James had opened a questionable business in Wichita, Kansas, Wyatt headed there, to a city buzzing with trains, cattle drives, and ambition. It was a place built on dust and desire, where the law was as fragile as paper. The police force was desperately short-handed. Wyatt showed up at the right time. After helping an officer track down a gang of thieves, he was offered a position in the marshal's office. For the first time in years, he held an official job, complete with a badge, a paycheck, and seemingly respect. But the position came with pressure. His quick temper, inherited from his father, sparked conflicts. Once again, Wyatt lost everything and left, this time to Dodge City, where his brother had relocated. And once again, he started over. Then came the year 1876. A thief known as Dirty Dave Rudabaugh robbed the Santa Fe Company and fled south to Texas. Wyatt was appointed temporary deputy U.S. Marshal and sent in pursuit. The mission would change everything. While following Rudabaugh's trail, Wyatt crossed paths with a professional gambler who knew the outlaw, and that encounter would alter the course of Wyatt Earp's life forever. Tombstone was still ahead. So was the legendary gunfight at the O.K. Corral, with its dust, blood, glory, and lasting curse. But before all that, there was just a boy who wanted to be a hero, and became a man forever running from his pain. When Wyatt Earp first met Doc Holliday, that legendary gambler with a sharp gaze and a cough that sounded like a death sentence, there was a spark. Not the kind that comes from gunfire, but something deeper, something that would outlast any bullet. That was the beginning of a friendship forged in smoke and whiskey, one that would survive far more than just a few saloon brawls. Earp had just arrived in Dodge City, a town where each day could begin in hell and end somewhere even worse. It was the raw, unfiltered heart of the Wild West, brutal, unforgiving, and drunk on its own freedom. But even the wildest frontiers change. Dodge City grew quieter, as if exhausted by its own chaos. For a man like Wyatt, who lived by the rule of shoot first, ask later, it felt like being left behind by time itself. And just when that feeling settled in, a letter arrived from his brother Virgil. He was now living in a rising mining town called Tombstone in the Arizona Territory. The town was still young but already loud, like a revolver cracking at sunrise. Wyatt didn't need to be asked twice. In the fall of 1879, he packed his gear and set off toward the most dangerous and defining chapter of his life. Tombstone greeted him with dust, gold-hungry faces, and the scent of money tangled with sweat and gunpowder. Almost immediately, Virgil, now a federal marshal, asked for Wyatt's help. 6 army mules had been stolen by cowboys from the Cochise County gang. Their leader, a man named Frank Patterson, promised to return them the next day. But instead of bringing back the animals, Patterson showed up empty-handed and full of mockery. No apologies, just open disrespect for the law. In that moment, they unknowingly signed their own death warrants. Their audacity only grew. Days later, 5 members of the gang, led by the notoriously unhinged Curly Bill Brocious, stumbled out of a saloon drunk and defiant, firing their guns into the night sky like they were trying to shoot down the moon. Town Marshal Fred White tried to stop them. He reached for Brocious's revolver, and it went off. The bullet tore into his groin. It happened fast. Wyatt arrived at the sound of gunfire and didn't waste a second. He struck Brocious over the head with his pistol. That's how justice worked in Tombstone. Fred White didn't survive. But before he died, he did something no one expected. He claimed the shooting was accidental and that Curly Bill wasn't to blame. Those dying words should have calmed the townspeople. But Tombstone was thirsty for vengeance. Still, because of White's final testimony and Wyatt's cool judgment, Brocious was secretly transported to Tucson. Had he stayed, the mob would have torn him apart. Wyatt's star rose quickly. He became deputy sheriff. But holding that position was another matter. He wasn't a politician, didn't know how to play favorites or bend with the wind. Eventually, he was pushed aside by a man named Johnny Behan, with whom Wyatt already had bad blood. Now that Behan wore the badge, their feud deepened. Tombstone was turning into a powder keg, and in the year 1881 it nearly exploded. One night, as wind howled through the streets and glasses clinked in saloons, a heated argument erupted. Doc Holliday, with his razor wit and haunted past, called Ike Clanton a liar. Ike was one of those cowboys who preferred threats over action, but with enough liquor and a crowd, anything could happen. Tension thickened. Tombstone was standing on the edge of legend. It was only the prologue to the infamous gunfight at the O.K. Corral. But even then, it was clear. The bloodiest pages were yet to be written. Wyatt Earp, lawman, brother, shadow, stood at the crossroads, caught between loyalty and justice, between honor and revenge. His story was only beginning. In a dusty little town with a name as ominous as its history, Tombstone, the air was strung tight like a drawn bow. Perched at the edge of civilization, where justice often took a back seat to bullets and personal grudges, 2 worlds collided. The wild freedom of the cowboys and the ironclad order of the Earp family, who believed in the law, even if it had to be delivered with the butt of a pistol. The tension had been simmering for a long time, but it all came to a head when Virgil Earp, tired of Ike Clanton's drunken threats and wild talk, struck him across the head with the handle of his revolver, his own brand of persuasion. He disarmed Clanton and hauled him into court, where Ike was fined $25. A small price on paper, but it wasn't about the money. The Earps had humiliated one of the most powerful men in Cochise County, and the Cowboy Brotherhood wasn't about to let that slide. While Ike was still inside the courthouse, Wyatt Earp had a near run-in with another cowboy, Tom McClory, just outside. The moment hung heavy. Wyatt asked if Tom was armed. Tom, with a crooked grin, lied and said no. But the handle of a revolver tucked in his waistband told another story. Without hesitation, Wyatt did what his brother had done. Struck Tom with his pistol. Almost like clockwork, more cowboys began flooding into town. Billy Clanton, Ike's brother, Frank McClory, Tom's brother, and Billy Claiborne. There were 5 of them now. At least 3 carried guns, and all of them carried rage. Virgil could sense what was coming. Blood. He didn't wait. He gathered his brothers, Wyatt and Morgan, along with their old friend Doc Holliday, and together they set out into the streets of Tombstone. Their destination was the O.K. Corral, a dusty lot near the edge of town where the cowboys were known to gather. On the way, they were stopped by Sheriff Johnny Behan, clearly nervous. According to Wyatt, the sheriff insisted the cowboys had already been disarmed. That was a lie. But the Earps weren't there to take anyone's word. They were there to see for themselves. As the Earp men approached the lot, a silence settled between them and the cowboys, heavier than the searing Arizona heat. No one knows for sure who fired the first shot. Most witnesses claimed the first 2 gunshots came almost at the same time. But what's certain is this: the fight was inevitable. Everyone was ready. Everyone had been waiting for it. When the thunder of gunfire finally faded, the air was thick with smoke and the ground soaked in blood. Doc Holliday came away with nothing more than a heavy bruise. A bullet had grazed dangerously close to his holster. Virgil took a hit to the leg, and Morgan was struck in both shoulders. Only Wyatt walked away untouched, as if fate had wrapped a shield around him that day. The cowboys weren't so lucky. Tom McClory, Frank McClory, and Billy Clanton were dead in the dust. As the Earps, battered and breathless, walked away from the scene, Sheriff Behan caught up to them. His face was pale, contorted with fear and confusion. He shouted that he had to place them under arrest. Wyatt turned to face him. His voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "You lied to me. You said they were unarmed. I went down there to disarm them. That wasn't just an accusation. It was a verdict on the fragile system that governed this place. A place where truth and justice were rarely found on the same side." Ike Clanton, the only cowboy to survive that day, was burning with fury. He did everything in his power to see the Earps and Doc Holliday jailed. And maybe, in his own way, he was right. They had killed his brother. But in a town where only the fastest hand lived to tell the tale, it wasn't just a shootout. It was a reckoning, a line drawn in the dust between law and lawlessness. And everyone had to choose where they stood. In the sun-scorched state of Arizona, amid the dusty streets and buzzing saloons of Tombstone, one of the darkest and bloodiest showdowns of the Wild West erupted. When the gun smoke finally cleared near the O.K. Corral, what remained wasn't justice. It was the brink of revenge. The judge assigned to unravel the chaos heard testimony from more than 30 witnesses. Among them stood Wyatt Earp's bitter rival, Sheriff Johnny Behan, a man known for deception and betrayal. Behan painted the cowboys as harmless, claiming they had raised their hands, emptied their pockets, and carried no weapons, while the ruthless Earps and Doc Holliday fired the first shots. But this version of the story was steeped in fear and political manipulation. Luckily, the truth didn't stand alone. Dozens of witnesses had watched from the windows that day, each with a version of events, each with their own truth. In the end, the court found insufficient evidence to charge the Earps or Holliday. But walking free didn't mean walking away unscarred. To many, they were now cold-blooded killers. And the cowboys, those who survived, had no intention of letting that go unanswered. Soon after the gunfight, retaliation came swiftly and without warning. Virgil Earp, ambushed while walking down the street, was hit by a shotgun blast that shredded his arm and shoulder, leaving him permanently maimed. Morgan Earp, enjoying a quiet game of billiards, was shot in the back. The bullet tore through the saloon's windows, striking him fatally. He clung to life for 40 agonizing minutes before slipping away. Something inside Wyatt Earp broke that night. The law he had once upheld now seemed powerless. He no longer believed in courts or justice, only in vengeance. He gathered a posse of 8 men and made a vow. From that moment forward, he would deliver justice with his own hands. Thus began the grim chapter known as the Earp Vendetta Ride. A trail of retribution soaked in blood and driven by fury. They hunted the remaining cowboys across the desert, flushing them from their hiding places and driving them into the wilderness. Among those on the run was Curly Bill Brocious, the very man Wyatt had once saved from a lynch mob. But mercy belonged to another life. This time, when they met face to face, Curly Bill fired first and missed. Wyatt didn't flinch. His return shot was precise and fatal, hitting Curly Bill in the chest from 15 paces away. Several more cowboys fell in the aftermath. It seemed the vendetta had run its course. But vigilantism leaves a stain the law cannot ignore. As weak as it once seemed, justice had to reassert itself. Sheriff Behan raised a posse of his own and gave chase. He nearly caught them, almost had them within reach. But the Earps slipped away, disappearing into the dusty roads of New Mexico. Behan was forced to admit defeat. Wyatt Earp had escaped the law, though at the cost of something deeper, his own soul. Yet the end of the vendetta didn't just silence the guns. It fractured the bond between the men who had once stood together in blood and fire. Wyatt and Doc Holliday, once inseparable friends, never truly reunited. In the years that followed, they met only twice. Their final meeting came 5 years later. Wyatt's wife, Josephine, looked upon Doc Holliday and saw not the legend, but a ghost of the man he'd been. He was already at death's door. Thus closed one of the most brutal and tragic chapters in the history of the American West. Behind the legend lay sorrow, betrayal, and the heavy cost of vengeance. He arrived in Tombstone, a dry, dusty dot on the map where laws weren't written on paper but spelled out in gunpowder. His name was Johnny Behan, and he was no longer the man he used to be. Worn down, racked by a constant cough, barely able to stay upright. More of a ghost than a gunslinger. But even in that condition, he brought something far more intriguing than his reputation. A woman named Sadie Mansfield. Back then, she was just a working girl, but time would transform her into someone much more significant. The woman the town would come to know as Josephine Earp. Ironically, Sadie didn't stay by Johnny's side for long. Almost immediately after arriving, she caught him in bed with another woman. What followed was predictable. The door slammed shut behind him, and soon enough, the townsfolk began noticing Sadie spending more and more time with another man, Wyatt Earp, the very same Wyatt who had been Johnny's bitter rival. In a world where revolvers settled disputes and honor was measured in bullets, Wyatt took a different path. If he couldn't take Behan's place outright, he could at least win over the woman he had lost. That was the beginning of a story where the brutality of the frontier gave way to something stranger and far more enduring. A bond. The two of them eventually made their way to San Francisco, no longer outlaws or fugitives, but simply a couple trying to carve out a quiet life. Sadie, now known as Josephine Earp, and Wyatt lived together for more than 40 years. They never married in any official sense, but what they shared mattered more than any piece of paper. In his final years, Earp settled in Los Angeles, not as a legend of the West, not as a gunslinger or lawman, but as an aging man offering advice on Hollywood movie sets. He dreamed that his story, this true ballad of survival and loss, of truth and myth, would one day be told on the big screen. But there was no cinematic ending. He passed quietly, succumbing to illness at the age of 80. He had no children. He outlived all of his siblings. All that remained was Josephine and the fading echoes of a vanished time. By the time he took his last breath, the Wild West had long ceased to exist. It had become a legend, and Wyatt Earp was perhaps the last living witness to that harsh, mythical era, when good and evil wore the same hat, and destinies were decided in dusty saloons.